Hi there. In the last video, I taught you about memory cues and structuring your music. Now I'm going to show you how to apply that knowledge to improve your mixes and help you realize when the right time to transition from track to track is. First of all, when you're mixing, try to compose your mix in a similar way to the track is composed and structured. For example, if we look at the structure of a house track, as we saw in the previous video, it goes from a drop to a breakdown. Therefore, when you're mixing from one track to the next, let the section that you're on end, meaning the drop, and then mix into the new track. So if you're mixing during the drop of the master track, mix out of it and come into the first breakdown of your new track. Now, I know this is a bit confusing, but don't worry about it. I recommend you keep going through the course and perhaps come back to this video after you've completed the course once, as it will make much more sense to you then. I'd like to use an analogy here that I think will help you understand what I'm talking about. Let's think of your entire DJ mix as a book. We will refer to each track as a chapter and each section within that track as a paragraph. Now, what our goal is when one paragraph ends on one of your tracks, a new paragraph would naturally begin. So we want that to also be true on your new track. What I'm going to do is actually go through mixing two tracks and demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about. So as you can see, as I showed you in the previous video, I've set up memory cues here and here so that I can see exactly where the sections begin and end. Now, this is going to be the first track I'll be playing. So track one's going to be the master track, and I'm going to start it a little bit before the drop comes in. Now, I've placed 5 memory cues on the drop, which indicates that the drop is 4 phrases long, because the first memory cue indicates the beginning of the first phrase, and the last memory cue indicates the end of the last phrase. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Same exact thing on the intro here. I've placed 5 memory cues because that is the duration of the intro. And at the end of these 4 phrases, the first breakdown / build-up comes in, which then goes into the drop. So my goal is to match the end of the drop here with the end of the intro. How would I do this? Well, I would have to start the incoming track at the beginning of the first phrase, exactly when the drop begins. Because that way, on both tracks, I have exactly 4 phrases before both sections end. And at the end of these sections, that's going to be when I fully transition from track 1 to 2. And I'll show you the process I'm taking right now. So let's begin. I'm going to put this track just a couple bars before to give me a little bit of lead up time. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4. And 1, 2. Now I'm going to beat 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now I'm coming into the third phrase. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now coming into the fourth phrase, I'm going to start turning up the volume. 7, 8, 2, 3, 4, up. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'm going to fade the outgoing track down on 1, 8, 2, 3, 4, down. And we're into the new track at the exact point where the drop ended. Great. I hope you understood that. Now you might ask, why can't you mix into the new track halfway through the drop, so halfway through a section? Well, the way I like to think of it is like this. When you're writing a book, you wouldn't cut a sentence or a paragraph in half. You have to finish it first so that it makes sense and then go into the next paragraph. It's the same thing here. If you cut the drop or any section of the track halfway through, it's not always going to sound very good. Now, of course, you can break these rules, but learn them first. Get really good at understanding the whole structure of your tracks, and then you can start to break it. So for now, I would advise that you mix from section to section in the way I just showed you. Now, one more point I want to stress is that, as you saw, I started mixing in the new track before the section ended so that the volume was all the way up. That way, when the section ends, I can simply fade down the volume and bring out the outgoing track. One thing you don't want to do is simply switch, because if you do that, it sounds very abrupt and it doesn't allow you to transition seamlessly from one track to the next. So the process is you press play, you beat match. At the beginning of the last phrase, before you've got to turn the other track down, you turn up the volume, and then on the end of that last phrase, you turn down the volume of the outgoing track. And that's how you want to start structuring your mixes. Another tip is to keep the energy levels of your tracks relatively fluent. In other words, you don't want to mix out of a really heavy track and into a track that lacks energy. Now, of course, these rules, like I said, are made to be broken, but only break them when you really know what you're doing and you've had enough practice that you know what to expect. Now, something else that's really important is you don't want to take out the track that you're playing to your audience, the master track, if it's building up. See, if the track is building up, your audience is expecting something big to come in. This is normally the drop or the chorus if you're playing something more poppy. The problem with taking out the track during the build-up is that it's kind of like telling a kid you can have ice cream and then never giving it to them. They're anticipating that drop, and if it never comes, it doesn't sound too good. So I would advise not mixing in your new track until you get towards the end of the drop, or until you get to a part of a track that is quite mellow and there isn't too much going on, which gives you the space to start bringing in your new track. So something that a lot of drum and bass and tech house DJs do is they wait for the end of the drop, and as soon as the drop ends, because there tends to be a long breakdown without much going on at all, that is when they start bringing up the new track and then slowly fading down the outgoing track. I'm going to give you an example of this right now. So I've loaded two tracks over here, and the very first thing that I've got to do when loading my tracks is match the BPM. And normally you match the BPM of the incoming track because people won't be able to hear the change in tempo. Once you've done that, we can then begin our mix. So remember, I'm going to mix during the breakdown here, and I'm only able to do this because this breakdown is very long and there isn't any intense build-up that's going on, allowing me to create a clean transition from this track to this track during the breakdown. Let's begin. Now we're almost from the last phrase of the drop, which is when I'm going to press play and start beat matching to prepare the track for when the drop ends. 8, 2, 3, 4, 1. And 7, 8, 2, 3, 4, 1. And I'm turning up the track gradually throughout this phrase. 5, 6, 7, 8, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And I'm creating a smooth transition from one track to the next. And at the end of the intro, 3, 4, down. And we're into our new track. Now, one extra tip is that if you're a beginner, utilize those intros and outros. In other words, mix in and out of your tracks during the intro and outro sections, because in most cases, the intro and outro will be composed of nothing more than a drum beat, making it really easy to transition from one track to the next. This is because you can simply mix the intro of your next track over the outro of the master track. If the tracks you're trying to mix don't contain drum intros and outros, in most cases, you can actually find club versions or extended versions online. So look for those, download them, and use them when mixing. I also want to mention that there are always exceptions to these rules, but I would only break them once you're confident with your phrases and the different sections in the tracks. So with that in mind, go ahead and practice these mixes, and I'll see you in the next video.